Throughout this video, I will explain a little bit about criminal careers, most specifically detailing psychologist Terry Moffitt's life course Trajectories. In the 1990s, we see the emergence of developmental criminology. This realm of criminology attempts to understand how children and youth become embedded in a career of crime and tries to explain how some drop off and others prosper. This notion of a criminal career is plausible when we acknowledge that a small percentage of the offender population is responsible for a large portion of recorded offences. Glenn Walters notes that in another study, it was found that 10% of the criminal population is responsible for over 50% of all crime. Of these high-rate offenders, it was noted that they began their criminal careers quite young in their childhood and would continue on this delinquent behaviour for years after. So following this, delinquency among children is quite common. Here we see antisocial behaviours as what Dennis Howard defines as ones which violate the social rules of a particular society which generally promote respect for people and their property. This continuity of antisocial behaviour throughout childhood, further reaching adulthood, can be explained through Terry Moffitt's life course Trajectories. The development of delinquency, according to Moffitt, follows one of two trajectories, one being the life course persistent and the second being adolescence limited. The life course persistent pathway sees antisocial behaviour begin in childhood and continues through to adulthood. Adolescence limited starts and ends in adolescence. Life course persistent offenders commit the majority of crime but represent the minority of delinquents, sitting at around 5 to 10%. So here we can see a visual representation of life course persistent offenders across the age scale, making up a small percentage of antisocial behaviour but across a long lifespan. Then we have the curve of adolescence limited applied. We see these offenders make up a majority of the antisocial behaviours, but it is seen to drop off quite significantly with criminal careers of shorter durations. Adolescence limited delinquency is often characterised as normative reactions to social pressures. Their antisocial behaviour shows little continuity into adulthood. Moffitt explains the acts of crime as responses to situations that might seem profitable. Furthermore, they're likely to abandon these behaviours when pro-social conformities become more rewarding. Moffitt states another driving force of delinquent behaviour among adolescence limited offenders is the social mimicry of life course persistent offenders. So crime, for adolescents in a way, can be seen as establishing one's own autonomy of grasping their own independence away from parental authority. Moffitt quotes perfectly, "Every curfew violated, car stolen, drug taken and baby conceived is a statement of personal independence and thus a reinforcer of delinquent involvement." Life course persistent offenders are characterised by early environmental deprivations, neuropsychological deficits and problematic relationships. Ultimately, children who veer down this path are predisposed to a life of crime. They might have experienced a range of childhood risk factors such as a lack of parental supervision or school difficulties. Although life course persistent offenders are relatively rare, their crimes become violent. Although the antisocial behaviours of life course persistent individuals are continuous, their acts vary in determination of their age. Moffitt suggests that, for example, a 4-year-old might demonstrate biting or hitting, a 10-year-old might consist of rebelling at school or shoplifting, a 16-year-old might turn to drug dealing or car theft, and at 22 years of age they might be involved with robberies or rape. So it is important to note that the life course persistent offender is often consistent in their behaviours across different settings. As the individual grows, their antisocial behaviours manifest in regard to their changing environment. To put this in perspective, we can look at well-known serial killer Richard Ramirez, who during his adult criminal career murdered and raped multiple victims. Ramirez was charged with the murders at 25 years of age, but prior to this in his youth, he was committing numerous petty crimes. Ramirez demonstrated a number of factors illustrated by Moffitt. Growing up, Ramirez had a little parental support. At 2 years old, he suffered from a head injury resulting in 30 stitches, and at 6, he was knocked unconscious by a swing. These circumstances affected his neuropsychological well-being, and at 11, he began having seizures, later being diagnosed as epileptic. During his school years, Ramirez began stealing, and at 15, he attempted his first rape. At 18 years old, he began committing burglaries and stealing cars. Shortly after Ramirez started brutally raping women, his string of murders began. Through Moffitt's life course persistent trajectory, we can see the clear structure Ramirez follows in regards to ongoing antisocial behaviour manifesting through different settings. Ramirez was subject to environmental deprivations, and having suffered from head injuries as a young child, these characterised difficulties extended long into adulthood. So, in conclusion, in order to understand criminal careers, we must consider their onset and duration. Developmental theories such as Moffitt's life course trajectories aid in identifying these core dimensions and help us to explain the behaviours that these offenders exhibit.